The more you don't have sex, the less you want it. It sounds simple, even obvious, but beneath this truth lies a profound psychological, physiological, emotional, and spiritual transformation that most men never fully understand until they live it. In our younger years, desire feels urgent, ever present, almost impossible to ignore. It's not just a want, it feels like a need, a force embedded deep in our biology. We chase it, fantasize about it, obsess over it. Our culture, media, and peers reinforce the idea that masculinity is directly tied to our sexual conquests. But something happens when you stop, not just for a week, not just because you're busy, but when months pass, or years. You don't plan it, perhaps. Life shifts, a breakup, a decision to focus, or just a period of unintentional abstinence. At first, it's uncomfortable, like missing a meal or skipping sleep. But over time, something shifts. The craving dulls, the intensity fades. You start to notice that the thoughts that used to dominate your mind begin to retreat into the background. You feel clearer, calmer, almost as if a fog you never knew existed has quietly lifted. But that clarity comes with questions. Who are you without this urge driving you? What have you lost? Or perhaps, what have you gained? This is where it gets interesting, because the reduction in desire isn't just a lack of libido, it's a rewiring of the mind. Neuroscience calls it neuroplasticity. The brain adapts to what it repeatedly does or doesn't do. Without stimulation, the pathways linked to arousal weaken. The triggers that once excited you no longer spark the same fire. The body begins to assume that sex is no longer a relevant need. It's as if your system decides to conserve energy by dialing back the drive. And that's where many men find themselves, unexpectedly, not just not having sex, but no longer missing it. The truth is, abstinence doesn't kill you, it reshapes you, and it's not inherently good or bad. It simply is. For some, this state of detachment becomes a form of power. Without the constant pull of sexual desire, they report heightened focus, deeper creativity, and stronger emotional discipline. This is the foundation of movements like celibacy, semen retention, and monk mode. Men who embrace abstinence voluntarily speak of clarity, increased motivation, and inner peace. They feel free, not enslaved by their urges. But freedom always has two sides, because with detachment can come numbness. What once made you feel alive now barely moves you. The passion that once surged in your veins becomes a memory, and for some, that's terrifying. It makes them question their masculinity, their vitality, their identity. We are conditioned to believe that desire equals youth, strength, and relevance. So when desire fades, it can feel like something inside us has died. But maybe it's not death. Maybe it's evolution, a chance to rediscover who we are beyond our instincts. There's a deeper question to ask. Was your desire ever truly yours? Or was it shaped by the internet, pornography, peer pressure, comparison, fantasy, and insecurity? When you stop chasing sex, you stop being controlled by the outside world. And only then do you begin to reclaim your inner world. In that space, you find the real you, raw, silent, and still. But even this isn't the end, because eventually, a strange thing can happen. Desire returns, but not as a frenzy, not as obsession, not as addiction. It comes back as something softer, wiser, and more intentional. You begin to realize that real intimacy was never about frequency. It was about depth, connection, energy, purpose. You no longer seek sex to validate your ego or to escape boredom. You seek it, if at all, as an extension of love, trust, and shared energy. And that's a different kind of hunger. One not born from deprivation, but from emotional alignment. And if it never returns, that's okay too, because you've seen both sides. You've lived with it and without it. And in doing so, you've become the kind of man who isn't driven by his impulses, but guided by his values. The more you don't have sex, the less you want it. But the more you understand why you ever wanted it to begin with. And that understanding changes everything. It changes how you view relationships, how you treat women, how you use your time, and how you carry your presence. You begin to see the world not through the lens of gratification, but through the clarity of purpose. You listen more. You look people in the eyes. You're not distracted by fantasy because you're rooted in reality. And in that space, you're not just more masculine, you're more human. It's in that stillness that you recognize how much energy we waste chasing temporary highs. You realize how little sex actually fulfills when it's disconnected from meaning, and how deeply we've misunderstood what it means to be a man. True strength is restraint, true power is discipline, and true freedom is not needing what the world tells you that you must have. You understand that masculinity isn't proven in a bedroom. It's forged in silence, in solitude, and in mastering the self. So yes, the more you don't have sex, the less you want it. But maybe that's not a problem. Maybe that's the path to becoming who you were always meant to be. And yet, even with this newfound clarity, the world doesn't stop trying to pull you back. Adverts, screens, conversations, casual jokes, all reminding you of what you're supposed to want. But something inside you has shifted. You look at the same images, and they no longer stir the same reaction. Not because you're broken, but because you're healing. You've begun to break free from a system that profits off your distraction and weakness. And in that detachment, you find space for reflection. You start to remember the times you chased connection for the wrong reasons. Not to give, but to take. Not out of love, but out of loneliness. Not because you felt whole, but because you were trying to fill a void. And now, in this space of abstinence, you confront that void directly. You sit with it. You don't try to drown it in pleasure or silence, it with stimulation. You just feel it. And that takes courage, because most men never do. Most spend their entire lives trying to escape silence. But you're learning to listen to it, to hear what your heart has to say when it's not competing with noise. And what you hear is humbling. You hear the pain of years spent misunderstanding yourself, the grief of missed connections, the regret of using people instead of truly seeing them. But you also hear something else: strength. The quiet, grounded strength of a man who no longer runs from himself. And that's where the transformation begins. You stop thinking in terms of what you're missing and start recognizing what you're gaining. Presence, focus, intuition, emotional range. You realize that sex, in its most sacred form, is not about conquest or validation. It's about merging with another soul in a moment of complete vulnerability. And if you never find that, you're okay, because you've already found yourself. You've realized that you are enough, not when you're with someone, but when you're alone and still feel whole. This journey isn't for everyone. It's not glamorous. It's not always easy, but it's real. And in a world addicted to illusions, being real is rare. You begin to live more intentionally. You protect your energy. You guard your peace. You say no more often, not out of arrogance, but out of awareness. You stop over-explaining yourself. You stop trying to prove your worth. Because when you no longer crave external validation, you no longer need to perform. You just are. And in that being, you start attracting different energy, not from the loud and restless, but from the grounded and intentional. The kind of people who've also walked through fire, sat with discomfort, and come out on the other side more conscious. You see that sexuality is powerful, but only when mastered. Otherwise, it controls you. You see how many lives have been derailed by uncontrolled desire, families broken, dreams abandoned, values compromised, and you feel grateful that you stepped back, that you paused, that you asked the hard questions, because that pause, that intentional absence, saved you, and in that saving, you became a man not defined by his hunger, but by his harmony. A man who knows what he wants, but doesn't need it to feel whole. A man who respects desire, but refuses to be enslaved by it. A man who has transmuted lust into presence, craving into creativity, and addiction into awareness. You learn that self-control isn't repression. It's redirection. It's taking the wildfire and building a warm hearth. It's turning chaos into purpose. You stop viewing sex as a trophy and start seeing it as sacred. Something that, when done consciously, becomes a shared meditation, not a performance. But whether it returns to your life or not is no longer your obsession. You've transcended that. You've tasted freedom. And once you've felt that, you can't go back. You won't trade it for a few minutes of dopamine. You won't destroy your peace for a fleeting moment. Because you know what it costs to get here. You know how many nights you wrestled with yourself. How many old patterns you broke. How many times you almost gave in and didn't. And now, in the stillness, you smile. Not because you're superior, but because you're finally aligned. You walk differently, talk differently. You don't react, you respond. You don't chase, you attract. You don't consume, you create. You realize that the more you didn't have sex, the more you were invited to build a relationship with your own soul. And in that relationship, you found intimacy beyond the physical, the kind that changes how you see everything, how you love, how you live, how you lead, and you wouldn't trade it for anything.